So apparently BL scientist Axel is back because today we're going to ask ourselves a very important question. Is BL actual LGBTQ plus representation? So I want to preface this video by spoiling you, well, all of it, by saying that there will be no clear-cut answer by the end of this video. First of all, because I absolutely do not speak for the whole LGBTQ plus community. At the end of the day, and for every topic, we can only ever speak for ourselves. But also because I'm myself quite conflicted, if I must be honest. Who would have thought that, like, almost everything, the answer to this question is very nuanced? Incredible! So I genuinely want to know all of your opinions on the matter in the comment section down below. After you've watched my whole video, of course. So this video's topic came to mind after multiple instances that caught my attention. Mostly the fact that I often see people comparing different BL shows on whether or not they make up LGBTQ plus representation, but also a few particular instances where a show seems to be too good to be BL. The greatest example of that is I Told Sunset About You. I can't count the number of times I've read people say that it's better than BL or more than BL, or even a show like Papa and Daddy where I've read comments saying that it's more of an LGBTQ plus series than a BL one. And that interests me a lot. Because first of all, it's almost like BL has become a badge of quality, or more like a badge of lack of quality. Meaning shows that are extremely cinematic and flawlessly executed like I Told Sunset About You are somehow better than the genre. Which is an opinion I don't necessarily agree with. Because BL is, before anything else, a genre. Therefore, it contains series of all qualities, just like every genre out there. It's not a badge of quality or lack thereof, it's just a category. To go back to the show Papa and Daddy, it does feel quite different from usual BL shows that seem to kind of stray away from deeper LGBTQ plus topics. And I would say the activism element of the show is just as present as the man-loving man romantic one. But before we go too far, let's define LGBTQ plus representation. So the definitions I've found for the word representation are just not very good in my opinion. So my own definition that I found is clear while also saying essentially the same thing is that representation is the portrayal of a group of individuals in a piece of media or art. Tell me if you have your own definition that varies from mine. Now for BL, everyone has their own definition. Some consider any gay storyline from any country BL. Some consider even side storylines with a gay romance BL. Some consider movies with men loving men BL. But I actually have my own definition that has never really changed or evolved, so I do think it's pretty solid. Though I'm not saying it's the right definition simply because there is no official one, so I won't claim mine is the most accurate. Even though BL has become an official genre in certain Asian countries, even having its own award ceremonies like the Wineverse Awards, the rules of the genre are still pretty blurry. But my definition of BL is this one. One, it has to come from specific Asian countries. For example, an Indian or a French gay storyline is not BL, while a Thai storyline is. The main difference is truly the industry and culture surrounding this series. And BL only exists in very specific regions of Asia, and you know which one if you've watched BL. Two, it has to be a romance where the main storyline is two men falling in love. So to me, when the show is an ensemble cast and there are gay characters, it is not BL, unless the gay romance is the main aspect of the story. For example, Theory of Love is BL, while True Will Be Free is not. Love by Chance is BL, while The Stranded is not. Lovesick is BL, while Friendzone is not. And three, it has to be a series. It has honestly hit me that the main difference between what I consider BL or LGBTQ plus media that fits the two previous categories is the difference between it being a movie or a series. And that comes from the fact that movies don't usually have that kind of fan servicey element to them that a lot of BL have. Except for maybe Waterboy the movie, which was created right after the popularity of Lovesick and capitalized off of those elements. I would also say that the movie Sweet Student Boy with Shimon also could fall under that category. So that third element of the definition can be slightly flexible, but it does apply most of the time. So if LGBTQ plus representation is the portrayal of a certain group of individuals in a piece of media, and BL is a love story between two men, then BL is automatically and by definition LGBTQ plus representation. It doesn't have to be good, bad, neutral representation, because representation is not a badge of quality. It doesn't by definition mean good representation. It means any representation, and then it's up to each individual to decide for themselves. And I know what you're gonna tell me. Axel, it took you this long to realize that? And that's when I pull the Uno reverse card and tell you that this video is not about whether or not BL is LGBTQ plus representation, but it's about the quality of the representation, and most importantly, whether or not BL wants to be LGBTQ plus representation. So does BL want to be LGBTQ plus representation? The short answer is most of the time no. The longer answer is that it truly depends on the novel the show is very often adapted from, and also the director and screenwriter. And for me, it forms three very distinct categories. There's the denial of representation, the neutrality of representation, and the want for representation. I would say the denial of representation are BL shows that go further than just not giving their very obviously not straight characters LGBTQ plus labels, and more into the outright denial of the queer elements of the relationship to make it somewhat straight while also being gay. I know, very confusing. For me, the trope that best exemplifies wanting that sweet man-loving man story to attract all the fangirls without the implications of being an actual gay series would be the I don't like guys but I like him trope, which is very infamous in the BL fandom as it was quite overused by earlier BL shows such as Lovesick, Sotus, or Make It Right, and was still even used in 2020 by My Engineer. The problem with this trope is that it doesn't come from the character's denial that they are partaking in some fruity behavior, because when they make that statement, it's often to their friends that have just found out about said fruity behavior. So it's known. That particular comment is truly about the writers distancing their character from actual LGBTQ plus individuals. And of course, we could say that it's to show the characters struggling with their sexuality, which could be a valid argument in a show like Lovesick, where Poon and No clearly struggle with their attraction to men. But in the other shows where there is no stakes and the relationship is already out in the open and accepted by all, it just feels a little weird to me. Then we have the most common case in BL shows, which is the neutrality of representation. There is no label set, there is no particular struggle or even just emphasis around the sexuality of the characters, all of that while still portraying a man-loving man relationship. So this show simply just showcase a queer relationship as if it was happening in a vacuum, where the stakes are never about the fact that there are two guys, but about something else. And that trope leaves me pretty divided about it. Because yes, on the one hand, it does portray an LGBTQ plus relationship in a way that is rarely seen in Western media, by focusing on feelings and exterior elements that have nothing to do with the fact that it's a man-loving man relationship. And that's in a way refreshing and sort of liberating, while also seemingly giving the message that queer relationships are okay as long as they're not labeled as such. There are so many shows in this category that come to mind, and it's not even all of them, but buckle up. There's Together, Theory of Love, Gen Y, Ingredients, Cherry Magic, Manner of Death, Color Rush, YYY, Love by Chance 2, You Make Me Dance, The Moment, Friend Forever, and those are all shows I at the very least like, and even others I love. So I'm not trying to imply that the neutrality of representation is inherently bad, but I just think that it's very telling that a genre like BL, which was created for straight women, likes to ignore labels or queer specific elements outside of the love story because of convenience. So here we have the last category, which is shows that do strive for representation. For me, the best way to compare the neutrality of representation and the want for representation is to compare the show Together with its 5-episode sequel, Still Together. In Together, the relationship between Tan and Sarawat is most definitely in the neutrality of representation. There is no talk about sexuality or anything that makes it feel like an LGBTQ plus series, besides obviously the man-loving man relationships that take place on the show. But in its sequel, where the director has been changed, we have a wonderful scene between Sarawat and Earn about being confident enough to show off your LGBTQ plus relationship to others. It's a less than 5-minute scene, yet it felt extremely authentic to the LGBTQ plus experience. And for me, that's no coincidence, since Still Together was directed by P-Off. Not that P-Off, that one. P-Off, who is an LGBTQ plus man himself, and who sprinkles scenes like this one in Still Together in every single one of his shows. So the strive for representation can come in many ways. It can be with using labels, which is still pretty rare outside of Filipino BL series, but there is Love by Chance with Pete being gay, Until We Meet Again with Alex being bi, Lovely Writer with Jean being gay, and yeah, that's kind of it apart from Filipino dramas. But I'm gonna be talking about them as a whole in a minute, so I will focus on other countries for now. It can also be coming out scenes like Pete's one in Love by Chance Yet Again, Tan from He's Coming to Me, Ito from Life Love on the Line, and Jean from Lovely Writer. It can also be showcasing a character struggling to come to terms with their sexuality, like Te from I Told Sunset About You, Kido from Mood Indigo, again Ito from Life Love on the Line, and the characters from His I Didn't Think I'd Fall in Love. It can also be just the parents struggling to accept their kids' sexuality. There's Morkenty from My Tea, Fighter and Tutor from Why Are You, High's parents from My Girl in Your Gown, and the parents from History Treaty Make Our Days Count. And finally, it can also be having a conversation about said sexuality, or just simply acknowledging it. There's Te in I Told Sunset About You, sorry I'm gonna butcher it, this one from Crossing the Line, Tian with Toon in 1,000 Stars, Pete Cow in Dark Blue Kiss, Tengmo in Great Men Academy, Xiaofei in Trapped, Pete with A in Love by Chance. You get the picture. And for info, being in this third category is not a badge of quality. So the conclusion is that this shit is really blurry. For me, it's truly a case-by-case basis. But I also don't think every series with visibly queer characters needs to have them state their sexuality or tackle LGBTQ plus issues. I think sometimes it's nice to just have a gay rom-com that exists in a vacuum where homophobia and the fear of coming out don't exist. But I will also always remember what a fellow BL fan and friend told me about a year ago. That sometimes not acknowledging the queer experience of visibly queer characters, even though if to show an idealized view of our society, is actually erasing the queer aspects of the characters altogether. And I cannot say I disagree. I think you can absolutely make a BL show where sexuality isn't mentioned. How so many LGBTQ plus movies don't do that and are still great representation. But like with anything, the writers need to be conscious of not erasing that queer aspect either. Another reason why I wanted to talk about Filipino BL series separately is that all of the ones I've watched, absolutely all of them, are under the one for representation category, which, as you've been following up until now, doesn't happen at all with BL from other countries. From the moment I started watching Filipino dramas, I could tell that they were different. Almost all of them had their characters state their sexuality or come out, and even those that don't, like Boys Lockdown for example, still include very specific scenes that reflect the queer experience. Not that there's one queer experience, but you get it. In Boys Lockdown, it's with Shen pining after Ki and being disappointed that he has a girlfriend, or Ki discussing his sexuality with his friend Martin, which still absolutely makes the series fall in that third category. So even though Filipino series do fall under the BL label, because they do label themselves that way, simply because the Filipino audiences have always been huge BL fans, and they also fit the definition, those series feel significantly more like LGBTQ plus representation. And I think the biggest difference with Filipino BL is that it's actually made by LGBTQ plus people for LGBTQ plus people. The intent feels completely different. And Filipino BL directors have said multiple times that the reason why we had so many Filipino BL shows in 2020 is because queer directors finally got the chance to take this more mainstream and digestible aspect of BL that has made it so popular and mix it with actual queer stories that feel authentic. Filipino BL series feel more woke because they are. Because at the end of the day, even though I said that by definition BL is always LGBTQ plus representation, regardless of whether it wants to be or even is quality, I've also said that some series tend to feel like LGBTQ plus representation more than others. And that's because this whole discourse is more about feelings than it is about logic. I could feel that one show is amazing LGBTQ plus representation, while someone else thinks the opposite. Because like everything that is art, it is incredibly subjective. So that was it for today's video. I hope we'll have interesting conversations in the comments down below, because as I said, my mind isn't set in stone on the topic at all. I feel like BL, even though it didn't start for the LGBTQ plus community, has evolved into something that is. Because the thing is, if you create LGBTQ plus content, even if you just want two dudes making out without the rest of the queer experience, LGBTQ plus people are still gonna come watch it. I've said before that I believe that now most of the BL fandom is actually LGBTQ plus themselves, and I do stand by that. And I find it great that even though the progress for a representation that actually wants to be representation has taken a few years and is still pretty sparse, it is getting there. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this video. I rewrote it so many times because I didn't want to mess up, and have a great day.